So how do you figure out this coding system? Give me one example of what that even means.
Okay. What are the building blocks of thought? What are thoughts made of?
Words,
Words,
feelings,
Symbols and memory.
symbols, memory,
Concept.
concept. Interesting. If you were to describe something you're thinking about to me, how would you do it?
Through the senses. How it tastes, how it
Ah. You have how many? 5, arguably, right? Visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory. You describe your world, you make sense of your world through visual information, auditory information, kinesthetic information, olfactory, and gustatory. Those are the building blocks of your thoughts. Okay? Understand this, that communication is not metaphorical, it's literal. We have this thing called organ language. Something smells rotten to me. You're literally tapping into, in your mind, an olfactory they call modality. So part of your strategy for determining if something is not cool or is wrong is there's some kind of smell aspect, usually an internal. Now you can take this and go even further. You can go visual. Well, actually visual is probably not the best one because there's actually several categories in that. But think about it this way. You can be internally focused or externally focused. Okay? So when I say olfactory, something smells rotten to me, you may not literally physically smell something rotten in the environment, but on an internal level, in your own, there's a part of you that's actually tapping into an olfactory mechanism. Okay? Where it sounds like trouble, that rings a bell, crystal clear. These are all literal metaphors, literal representations of the structure of that process that we use. It comes out in our language. Okay? Your language is the last thing that comes out of it. Okay? Your nonverbal responses fire off about a second to a half a second, usually in that range, before the words come out of your mouth. So one of the things NLP is going to constantly look for is what you do before you speak. Where do your eyes go? How does your head tilt? Okay? What do your eyes do? Right? And then they're going to match what comes out of your mouth. And through that correlation or that congruency, as they like to use, they're going to decipher what your code is. They're going to figure out, because your eyes move.
It's like a classic poker tell.
Yes. As a matter of fact, a lot of poker professionals are actually spend a lot of time studying NLP. But actually, I think the poker guys are better at it. Poker guys are much better at it.
The sunglasses help.
Yes. But the thing about the poker guys is they know it's a battle of, it's not, you're not playing the cards, you're playing the other guys. Yeah. It's not about your hand, it's about you. So they're going to the really good ones are not only they're not going to give you any information, they're going to spend a lot of time giving you false information. Okay? Let's see here. So the eyes have it. I always manage to mangle this particular description. So when we do this, okay, this is your perspective, right? So if I say you're right, that's over here. I say you're left, that's over here. Okay? Some people reverse this. But basically the rule is you have the eyes. Okay? When the eyes move up, you tend to be accessing visual information.
You mean up vertically?
Up in general. Okay. Now, visual has several variations on this, which I learned from Kenrick, which visual could be up, it could be straight ahead. Like if you ask somebody a visual question, they'll just kind of stare blankly forward for a little while. That's usually a sign that they're also accessing visual. And then something that might happen a lot of times for visual is they might blink quite a bit. The blink rate might change. Okay, but NLP, I've never seen any NLP teacher besides Kenrick teaching the stare and the blink. So most of them will just, if the eyes shoot up, and when I say up, I mean in reference to the horizontal plane of the eyes. Okay?
I mean, physiologically, the brain sort of refocus, and maybe that's...
Yeah, because what happens is at an internal level, we're actually looking into the spatial filing cabinet.
Right.
Our neural, we're literally going up to access information we're storing in this visual field, subjectively. Okay? And that's another thing, from an influence perspective, one of the things you want to understand is that anything we store above the horizontal plane of the eyes tends to have a more beneficial and positive effect on us. That's why we say things are looking up. We don't say that when things are shitty, right? We say, what's got you down? You're such a downer. Why? Because we tend to store less than positive experience below the horizontal plane of the eye.
There was a study that shows that women have a higher blink rate. That means that's more data to work with.
The key thing to understand about NLP is that the magic, the keys to the kingdom, is outside of you. What we call uptime awareness. Paying attention to what's going on with the people in front of you, because that's where the information is. People will tell you every single thing you need to know, usually without them even knowing it, that you need to influence them. Okay? But most of us don't have the SRUs to really pay attention.
SRUs?
Self-regulating units. They're the fuel that drive our conscious mind. And when our SRUs are depleted, we default to the lizard brain. Okay?
So we store those up like a battery?
Mm-hmm. And the fastest way to get them back is to sleep, and or ingest lots of glucose. It's a direct relationship to the amount of glucose in our system, our blood sugar, to our amount of willpower. Okay. If you want to, there's a book called Willpower by Roy Baumeister, which if you want to go into the science behind that, it's all neuroscience. You can play with it. That's why we tend to, at the beginning of a week, Monday is usually our most productive day. And then as we go through the week, we get less and less productive.
It's why Friday's worthless.
It's usually why you also tend to break up with people more in relationships on Fridays than you do on Mondays. Because you're less tolerant. And you want something different. Because remember, when the SRUs go away, the lizard comes out to play. Okay? So, visually, above the horizontal plane of the eyes. Now, there's a further distinction on that. Up and to your left, visual memory. Usually when you see somebody going up and to the left, they're remembering something. If it goes up and to their right, it's still visual, but it's what they call visual construct. They're seeing a picture, but they're creating that picture.
So these are liars?
No. Do not make that leap. Ever. If you're going to do lie detection, you have to understand three primary things. One, no single cue means anything. Two, you must always establish a baseline. And three, cues only become relevant when they appear in clusters.
So, when we're getting to, what are they constructing?
They're creating a picture.
Okay.
Could they be lying? Yes. Are they lying? You don't know.
Can you give an example of when when they're creating the picture, what is it to respond to the question from you? Or?
Yeah, usually in response to a question or when they're recalling something. Like if I ask you, you guys can all remember your bedroom at home, right? All right. Well, see the bedroom in your mind, and now imagine the walls being painted pink.
You're right, my eyes want to go.
See?
Okay, right.
And you guys, I'll let you guys, if you guys want, you can play with it. So you can start asking yourself really weird questions and just seeing.
Where it goes.
But you got to remember, it's going to happen fast. It might, for some people, especially fast thinkers, it might just be a fraction of a second. But you'll see as they're, what happens a lot of times when you start asking certain questions, because not everybody leads with visual. And what do I mean by that? That's where it gets into strategy. See, we all have a visual component to our nervous system, but we don't always lead with it. Some people lead with visual. Some people, you ask them the question, like you, first thing you did was repeat my question in your head.
Right.
And then you tried to answer it. How did I know that? Because when I asked him his question, his eyes went to his left, mid-range. Because that's auditory. Auditory recall. Okay? Actually, I guess it's the same thing. But anyway, but yeah, he went, and you could actually see his head tilt, which is another thing auditories do. They go, like they're listening. Okay?
Your auditory, dude.
Well, most of you here have a very strong auditory component, or you wouldn't be here. The one thing that's pretty common, except for my demographic, which tends to pull a lot of martial artists as well, they usually have a very strong visual component, but mostly strong kinesthetic. Most of your hypnosis junkies are auditories.
Makes sense.
They're auditory. They usually did pretty well in school, too. Why? Because the school system is primarily an auditory heaven. But if you're not auditory, it's a nightmare. Okay? It's technically the worst way to teach a human being is through auditory. But if we can learn that way, God, we're good. Okay? So anything that's basically directly to the right, directly to the left, auditory. Okay? Down. Well, and by the way, it's interesting to note that the I-axis and cues really only cover 3 of the 5 modalities. But I have an answer for that. Anything down is kinesthetic, generally speaking. Although some people will say, like down left is kinesthetic and down right is what they call auditory digital. And the distinction they make with digital is that if I say the word cat, most of you will see some picture of a cat in your brain. Someone who's strong auditory digital will see the word cat. Right? Okay. I don't really play with that too much. It gets way too, honestly, a lot of the stuff for what I do, way too much minutia. Okay? This is a level of sophistication that you want to evolve to. They try to ram it down your throat during most 3-day NLP trainings. It ain't going to happen. You ain't going to be able to do it. So when I created CPI, which is my system of conversational hypnosis, we changed it and made it extremely practical and just very, very big chunks so that you can start using it right away. Because the big chunks are the most important parts, actually.
Is your involvement in martial arts like that too? Where it's more practical than...
Oh yeah, it has to be. I can teach you 80% of every martial art in about 2 minutes.
When I took Kung Fu many years ago, there seemed to be 2 schools where people wanted you to learn, every single thing that any master had ever known, as opposed to, I just don't want to get beat up in a fight.
Yeah. Yeah. The first thing you do is learn how to survive. And that's why I actually applied many of the things I learned in martial arts to how I taught persuasion, influence, and hypnosis, because it imparted the skill sets faster. Much more so, in a way that was usable. And I've continued to evolve and streamline that over time so that people could just go out and start getting results right away. Because if you don't get results the first time, in the first couple times that you do something and you can't calibrate the result, you're going to give up on it. It takes a person with a lot of SRUs in the bank to pick themselves up after getting slammed a few times because a technique that worked really well in the seminar room failed out on the street over and over again. But what I took everything that worked on the street, brought it back into the seminar room. You know, there's no saying in the martial arts community that what works in the street will always work in school, but what works in the school doesn't always work in the street. I took that same approach to persuasion, influence, and hypnosis. I started looking at who took this stuff out of the treatment room, who took this stuff out of the seminar room, and was using it in hostile environments and making it work. And what were they doing and how? Guess who that turned out to be? Seduction community. Seduction community took all this stuff and went out into the most hostile environment they could find and willingly got kicked in the nuts. Sometimes literally, over and over again. And why did they do that? The reptile. Because regardless of how many times you get kicked, the reptile has two prime directives. Survival, pass on the genes. And so whether you want to get up or not, it's going to make you get up and do it again until you find a way to make it work. Okay? And so I was fortunate enough to be an insider in that community for quite some time. Still am to a certain degree. But I also had the connections and the education to be able to reverse engineer what I was seeing, extract the principles, and make it generic or universal, for lack of a better word. That's why I can sit here and tell you about things like push-pull from a purely neuroscience perspective, from all this other stuff, and yet I can still give you the demo. You've seen the demo, you've seen the effect, but I can also explain why it works, so that you can take it and use it where it's appropriate. So we have auditory, again, just like eyes here, we have auditory visual, or auditory recall, auditory construct. Again, if you're going for deception, detection, and somebody's eyes shoot, and you got to calibrate this because not everybody is the same. Are you left-handed?
No.
No. Okay. Some people say that if you're left-handed, the eye accessing cues are reversed. So that's why you have to check.
Where's their watch?
And, you know, when they hold the drink, what hand do they hold it in? Most people hold the drink in their dominant hand. Where do they hold their cell phone? Right? And what hand do they manipulate the cell phone? Right? I almost always hold in my left and manipulate with my right.
Has there been any research with people who are cross-dominant? Because that one's kind of an interesting edge case because I target with my left eye, but my right hand is dominant.
Which one do you use most?
Mostly my right hand.
Again, remember, we're looking for generalizations. At this level of understanding, generalizations are useful at least 51% of the time. The problem is when you take that generalization and you start painting everybody with that brush without investigating to see if the generalization holds first. That's where the problem is, because it's the nature of human beings to default to heuristics. You guys know what heuristics are? Basically rules of thumb. This is what's worked, so we'll just default to that without actually investigating to see if it's appropriate or not.
No, that's what we're tracking.
Oh.
That's it, man.
Okay. Key stimulus, same thing as a heuristic. Okay. And of course, down low is kinesthetic. Now, I tend to think of olfactory and gustatory as subsets of kinesthetic. Because of your senses, kinesthetic is the most primal.
There's on a molecular level, they're touching you.
Okay? But if you think about how our senses develop, from gestation, from the womb, from everything else, the first sensation we ever have, or the first experience we ever have, is kinesthetic. Right? Then what comes? Usually I don't know which one of these would come first. But I would bet it's taste. But if you look at survival, it would probably be olfactory. Because as a rule, our sense of smell was to warn us of danger. So one of the things that would happen is we would smell something before we ate it. Right? But that could just be a sense of early warning. You know, I don't know what the exact pecking order for this is. But I know enough, and I've observed enough. This is David talking. This ain't NLP. This is just David's observations and things. That this triumvirate, this triangulation right here, is all subset of kinesthetic. Okay. So that's why smell has such a primal effect on us. It goes right to the reptile brain. It's the most primitive sense we have. It makes sense. But these are but if you, along with what this gentleman was saying, if you actually look at the distinction, this is an electromagnetic phenomenon. This is an electromagnetic phenomenon. These are molecular.
Physical nature.
Interesting. Just came to my mind. What he's saying. Good. Very much so. So, but just understand that I can get all that information from a conversation with you. You don't even know you're giving it to me. And then if I have enough SRUs and bandwidth, or what I call uptime awareness, I can begin to discern patterns of movement. You know, maybe you'll go up, across, and down with your eyes. What does that tell me? Visual, auditory, kinesthetic. That's the structure of your thought that you're having. If I tell you about an amazing sight I heard of, a thing that I saw, I went and I heard about it from my friend, and I felt really great when I went there, that's the structure of your communication. And you'll connect like that. You'll instantly feel like you know what I'm talking about. Whereas if you have this process, and I speak to you in this, your experience of my communication will be dramatically different, even though I'm saying the same thing. I felt like going out one day, and I saw this really cool sign. And I went and I listened to what the person had to say about it, and I jumped on it. I said exactly the same thing, basically, but the experience was very different, wasn't it? For two reasons. One, for some of you, it might have actually been closer to how you actually process. I'm betting not. Because most of you, when I said visual, you're like, I went kinesthetic, and you're like, oh. Because to the degree that I match your system, just like in CPI, we talk about mental friction, I eliminate mental friction. How do I do that? Because I minimize your need to translate what I'm saying into your language. Okay? You will feel more connected to me. You will get more rapport with me if I speak to you in the structure to which is native to your nervous system. To the degree that I mismatch this, you will find my communication harder to understand and be much more likely, A, to check out faster, and B, misunderstand me. Because we're literally talking in two different languages. All language is made up of the same sounds, and yet we have infinite numbers of languages, and we can't understand one another. Well, there's a similar parallel here. Your nervous system has its default way of doing things. If I match it, we're cool. If I don't, you have to work. Now, or you have to think about what I'm saying. Right? Now, for those of you who have been to some of my other previous talks, what is the one thing that human beings equate with intense thinking? Pain. What does the reptile do when faced with pain?
Just shuts off.
It moves away. The lizard moves away from pain and towards pleasure. Okay? Or, on a more subtle level, you can say it moves away from discomfort towards comfort. If I'm speaking here, even if I'm not talking about anything majorly emotional, or you'll feel more comfortable with me, so you'll tend to get have more rapport with me. I'll have more credibility with you too, which is important, especially in the business context. You need to have credibility, and to the degree that you match their code is the degree that you'll have higher credibility. Okay? Now, if you have their coding system but you're completely incongruent with it, or just really lacking in communication skills in general, you know, all the strategies in the world won't help you. You need all those other things, but that's not easy to get for most people, unless you really spend a lot of time training your nonverbal sensory acuity. Most of us get so fixated on the linguistic aspect that we lose everything else. That's why I have to spend a lot of time retraining guys who study conversational hypnosis. They get so fixated on the words that they lose everything else. You tap into the states, the words tend to take care of themselves. That's about all I have to say about that.